Hello and welcome to episode 51 of the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Andy Baines-Vosper. Andy, how are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you, and really appreciate the opportunity as well.
Amazing. Well, I'll start where we always start with arguably the hardest question. Andy, in your own words, what makes you a man?
Do you know, I don't know, I think is the answer. I find that a really, really difficult question. I think sometimes it changes day to day depending on how I'm feeling as well. But yeah, I think there's that, for me, it's very much that sense of sort of, for my family, that I'm sort of being that source of support, and I think for whatever my family need is very much sort of top of my list. That sort of husband, father role. I used to think it was defined by sort of me being the provider, and that's what made me the man. However, I think that takes away the value of what my wife does, and how brings support she brings to me and the family. At one point in my life, I used to think it was my ability to father children biologically, and then I think I realised when I found out I was infertile that actually that didn't make me a man. So I think it's very I think, as I said, for me the grounding of what makes me a man is just sort of being able to provide my family with what they need when they need it, in whatever capacity that is from me. As I said, sort of, I used to at one point think, being that provider, being the man of that, but I've soon realised that that's not necessarily the case anymore. So
Yeah, that's great. One thing that the reason I ask is you've sort of hit the nail on the head, which I kind of like, is that I don't know is a nice answer. Also, it's like, but actually thinking about it and having a thought and coming up with an answer is important. That's the reason I ask. Is I think no one knows, but I think you got to ask to think about it. And you've mentioned a few things that we're definitely going to touch on the podcast, which I'm really excited to be talking about today. But just for now, why don't you just intro yourself, let people know what it is that you do, and let's go from there.
Yeah, certainly. So, work-wise, I work for Samaritans. I'm senior project manager for our email service. So I look after our emotional support service and support the volunteers in delivering that. I've been a Samaritans volunteer for about 6.5 years. Something which very much I love doing, and I think changed the course and direction of my personal and professional career. As I said at the start, husband, father, so I've been married for a long time now, and have two amazing kids. I've got a son who's 26 now, daughter who's nearly 11. And as I said at the start, I also, through my own experiences with things like fertility, support a male fertility support group for a charity called Him Fertility, which basically gives men a safe space to come and talk and be themselves, and go through any sort of challenges they're having with fertility as well. And outside of all of that, I run my own sort of mental health campaign, so to speak, to in one way to raise awareness for Samaritans, but also just to encourage, especially men, to open up, talk, and to know that it's okay. So it's a campaign I run called Share the Weight, and it involves me carrying a 24.7 kilogram bag of worries with me on my shoulders pretty much wherever I go, and I'm trying to ask 1 million people to help share that weight. So I take it to various weird and wonderful places, take it to work, take it out to different events. I run with it, and just talk to people, ask them to help share the weight on my shoulders and tell them what it represents for me, and then ask them to help share the weight. As I said, to show that it's not weak, it's not a burden, to ask for help, and actually it's probably one of the best things I've ever done. And that's kind of me in a brief nutshell.
Yeah, very nice. Some really interesting things that you're involved in, and as always, as I find with most people, there's usually a story as to how you found yourself in this space. It's obviously amazing that you're here and providing basically an outlet for a number of men to discuss their issues. But why don't you sort of set the scene as to how you got into the space.
Yeah, so I mean, I suppose this all relates to that sort of bag of worries that I carry on my shoulder, and at different points in my life, it's represented different things. And if we probably start, I'll talk through some of them. Happy to talk through them in more detail, but to give you an overview of sort of what that bag represented to me at one point and what it represents now. So I'd say starting from that sort of late teens, early 20s, went through really, really bad period of drug addiction. And it was a really, really, really difficult point in life. Nearly lost family over it, and ended up in thousands and thousands of pounds worth of debt, and didn't get the help that I needed until I'd got to such a bad state that it was almost forced upon me, because I had to admit to family that I'd spent money that they'd lent me for various things on drugs. So yeah, that was one of the biggest bags of worries I had at the time. And then in sort of late 20s, found out that I was infertile. We were trying for a family, and then found out that unfortunately the chance was very, very low that it was going to happen biologically. I found out that it was due to male fertility issues. And so obviously that was a really, really difficult period of life that lasted quite a few years, rounds of IVF, ultimately leading us to go through adoption. Again, didn't really ask for help. I didn't get any emotional support when we were going through the infertility side of things. Then sort of a bit later on in life, I think everything just caught up with me, and went through a really, really bad period of depression. So I worked, just to give you some sort of context, I worked for the rail industry pretty much from my sort of mid-20s onwards. So, after sort of overcoming the challenges with drug addiction, managed to find a sort of stable job and worked up in life. Yeah, to a point where I think I got to a point where I was just really, really struggling with everything and ended up having a bit of a breakdown. Got to a point where I was going to and from work in tears. I was at the point where I didn't think that I could keep going anymore, and having some really, really difficult thoughts. Once again, only really reaching out for help at the point where I had no choice. Going through all of those experiences and sort of ended up taking quite a bit of time off of work and getting the help and support that I needed. It kind of made me want to do more for people that might have been going through some similar things. And that's what led me on to, volunteering with Samaritans. Obviously, they're a great source of support during various times. The sort of changed my career really. So, and what got me onto the whole bag of worries journey. Samaritans were Charity of the Year for London Marathon. And I was lucky enough to get a marathon place. Obviously running and obstacle course racing, things like that are really, really important to me and have been a massive help for my own well-being and mental health. And fortunate to get a place in the London Marathon and wanted to do something a bit different. So I thought, I'll carry a weight on my shoulders to show people that, what we're there to do is to help people with that invisible burden, sort of bring it to life for people. And then, the rest is history, as they say. So it was supposed to be for the London Marathon. And then, due to a few conversations and a few events, it's now taken on a life of its own. So, I think it's, as I said, there's so many points in my life that I've got to where I didn't ask for help when I should have done. And now I'm trying to encourage as many people to ask for help as possible, and show them that, Samaritans are always there to support. We're there to help take that burden off the shoulders and to help give people a bit of chance to rest and gain that strength to pick it up and carry it on again afterwards.
So there's obviously the big headlines around sort of like suicide and male suicide and those side of things. But I think things that are sort of misrepresented or sort of spoken about is drug and alcohol abuse. I think it is something that is essentially a coping mechanism, and at its absolute worst can also lead to the same outcome as suicide, right? Why do you think so many men do go down that route?
I think, you hit the nail on the head there. It's a coping mechanism. For me, it started off, as I said, in my late teens as sort of that recreational side of things. And then later on, it became a masking thing. I did it to make me feel better. And I think that's where the slippery slope comes in for some. And again, sort of not generalising, because I know we've all got the reasons why we do things and, each person's very different. ultimately it becomes that coping mechanism. It becomes that way of making you feel better or not feel the way you are. It might not make you feel better. There are many, many times where just because I might have been taking drugs didn't mean I felt great. I just didn't feel the way I was feeling before. And then, unfortunately, that's where that addiction starts to come in, because it's not just, as I said, not generalising, not sort of saying this is, but I think it's that addiction to the feeling of not feeling the way you do or the way you want to, that becomes addictive. And then after that, it's a really, really slippery slope into sort of that recovery or not, as the case may be.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. It's I'm very fortunate that I don't really have an addictive personality, nothing like, which actually has some negative effects when I'm trying to like run and you can't get addicted to being healthy. But yeah, it's so I'm fortunate in that sense. But you do see it. You see even in simple things as like just having a beer every night. Like it can be as little as that. I guess you can sort of reiterate this. You sort of touched on it a bit, which is that bag of worries isn't you yourself. It's changed over the time, right? Yeah. And also for each individual man, it doesn't matter what it is. It sort of weighs the same. Is that sort of the concept?
That's 100% the concept, and the contents of my bag has varied over the years. It'll probably change today and tomorrow, and there'll be different things that will fill up, and there'll be different things that I'll be worried and stressed about. And I think that the concept is that we've all got a weight on our shoulders, and people say to me all the time, it's really heavy, it's big, how do you carry it? But for me, that's the point, is that yes, you can see mine. If I walk into a room with it, you're instantly drawn to my bag of worries. The only difference between what I carry and what other people carry is you can see it. And to be honest with you, I think it's a lot lighter. I would rather carry the bag that I do than carry the weight of some of the things I've carried in life. And so to me, it's not as heavy as the burden that we carry. And there's a saying that has always resonated with me, and I think that's one of the things that sort of kicked off the whole idea to do it in the London Marathon, was that, and I think it's by a gentleman called Matt Haig, but I think it is, but and it's that suicide is the final collapse under an unbearable weight. And I think this is what that bag represents. It is that weight that we carry, and we never know what one thing might cause it from becoming bearable to becoming unbearable. And the longer we carry it for, the heavier it can get, and we never quite know when that moment of collapse might come. It might be something small, it might be something big, and I think that's why one of the things that I think is so important is that we're kind to each other. When we sort of look at all the work that goes on in the mental health field and awareness and, all of this stuff that we talk about and try and raise awareness of, I think sometimes we forget that ultimately underneath it all, sometimes just kindness is a good starting point, because we never know how close someone is to that moment of collapse. We never know how big that burden has got on their shoulders. Yeah, it's. I think hopefully it serves as that reminder that just to be kind and not judge.
Yeah, no, it's that's a nice quote. I've never actually heard that quote before. I've done some research and read some reports, and the sort of, I guess, academic way of saying that is that male suicide is predominantly a logical decision after a buildup of stresses. So essentially, your inability to take on stress anymore. So it's not like normally it's not impulse. It's literally a logical decision based on the fact that the straw has well and truly broken that camel's back. And again, just to reiterate some of your points, when I first started this journey, I didn't really tell my story. I didn't really say what had made me get to where I was, because I felt like it was irrelevant, because I know of men who have been through much worse and are still fine. And I know men that have gone through much less and have broken down. And I didn't want it. It's not a competition as to why you got there. It's a case of we're sort of both here now. What's the next step, so to speak? So yeah, it's that's an interesting. Well, it's a nice quote. It's a very nice quote. One thing I really want to talk about, because you mentioned it. You said it was what you thought was manhood, which was the ability to have children, right? And for a lot of men, that probably is something that's important to them. So, if you don't mind, I would love to hear a little bit more of your story around infertility.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right, and I think it's something we don't talk about enough, especially with our the younger generations and awareness of the challenges that we might face, and it is a significant challenge, especially male factor. And yeah, it was one of the most devastating things that had happened to me, at that point, finding out that that you're infertile and that they don't work the way they should, or they're not fast enough, or they're the wrong shape, which is pretty much all the tick. Well, I think I got nearly a full house. But I'd never questioned it up until the point where we'd been trying for a while, and then all of a sudden found out, we had to go for tests, and then you start to find out actually this might not happen. All of a sudden, my value as a male was tied up in becoming a father, and being able to have children. Up until that point, it was never part of my identity. And then as soon as you find out that you can't do it, it became my identity. And then the feelings that come with that are horrendous. And I think that people don't necessarily understand quite how men feel when you find out that you're infertile, or that you might have fertility challenges within the family unit, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
And the ability to have children. And, all of a sudden I felt completely and utterly worthless. I felt angry, frustrated, literally every negative emotion you can think of, you feel that way. But I didn't have anybody to really talk to. I didn't think I did anyway. I probably didn't look enough.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, that your whole identity is based around the fact that you can't have kids. And, I told some friends, but then friends don't really understand. And then you have things like banter, and, it becomes, it's a really, really difficult part of life, and it affects everything. We lost friends over it because you start to withdraw, because at the time where we were trying and going through fertility treatments and various different things, all your friends and family start to have children around you, and then all of a sudden it's everywhere. Everybody's having children. There's always a baby shower. It feels that way anyway.
Yeah.
And then I used to feel guilty because I see how my wife felt about the situation, and it's you start to think, would she be better off without me? Would she be better off finding somebody else that can give her what she wants? Although I wanted it, you sort of, turn the narrative because, it's how you're feeling at the time. It's devastating. It is absolutely devastating. And it's not spoken about enough. There's not enough support out there, although there is more and more support now. As I said, I've got a fertility support group that I support men going through it. And, like me, so many other men out there question whether they have got the ability to keep going on with life. I speak to so many men who've been in that position where, thoughts of suicide are regular, because it's such a huge part of life, especially going through fertility treatment. All of a sudden you've got appointments, and you've got, all of these things going on, time off of work. You see some of the things that your wife has to go through, or your partner, or, that your loved one has to go through, the tests, the treatment. And it's devastating, and it can really hit our self-worth. It can hit our pride. It can hit our everything. And I think the impact isn't seen as much, because we're great at hiding it. But unfortunately, it's one of the most devastating things I think I've been through, because as well, being a man, and I think, again, not generalizing, but one of the sort of being a male is about that sort of wanting to fix things, wanting to have a solution. That is something we have no control over. There is no sometimes solution, and you're up to the hands of medicine, treatments, all of this, completely out of your hands. And you feel quite helpless, unbelievably helpless. So yeah, that's just some of the things anyway. Conscious of this, just.
No, it's great. It's great. It's great to hear. I think the societal. So one of the things that I'm really big on is societal pressures as a whole, right? I think if you look at it from the classic American dream, the Joneses, that side of things, still a lot of pressure on men on that. Whether society has changed and moved on, and we look at equality, and we look at feminism, and we look at all of those things, that's only happened in a few years. So that nuclear family model still exists, right? And even I find it even with myself, like I'm pursuing an entrepreneurial journey, which is not get a degree, which I did get, and then get a good job, which I also then did, but then I left it, which scared my mum. But it goes. You're on a conveyor belt, right? You get the good job, you get the girlfriend becomes the wife, you get the kids, you get the dog, you get the bigger house, you get the next kid, you get the nice car, you get the golf membership, you get the great like it's you sort of see where it goes. So can you just sort of remember? I guess those initial conversations, right? Because it's sort of like Christmas dinner conversations. When are you guys having kids? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, see, it was interesting for us because I think one of the our journey was slightly different to that sort of model because so complete transparency. So I've got, as I said, I've got two children. My son's 26, daughter's 11. They're both my children through adoption. And at the time we went through fertility, my son is actually my wife's biological son. So it was very, and I've been, Jeff and I got together. I was 18 when we sort of went on our first date. She was a little bit older. And so my son was 2 at the time. So he was always part of my life and, has been my son the whole time really. But so it was a bit different because we already had that. And I think people assumed that because, we already had a child in our life and, it was our son that we were somehow, I think sometimes that it wasn't quite as bad for us because, we already had that. But yet, we both wanted another child. We wanted a child together. And I think that's also often overlooked is the sort of secondary side of fertility where people might have one child biologically or not, as the case may be, and are still struggling. The impact is still very much the same. It has different, obviously, context, but the feelings, the emotions, all the underlying stuff that goes behind it that makes us feel the way we do is the same. And so, it was really difficult, and especially going through, as I said, the fertility side of things. And I think what was really, really hard was that the older our son obviously we got together quite young, so our friends and family were starting to have children a bit later. So as we were getting to that point, we were sort of all of a sudden surrounded by young children at Christmas and birthdays, and our son was getting older, and we were still going through fertility, etc., etc. So it was just really, really difficult. And sometimes I think what we heard a lot, and I know a lot of people hear, is things like, thank your lucky stars you haven't got to do the sleepless nights, or thank your lucky stars you haven't got to change all the nappies, or I've much, that sort of anecdotal jokes and bits and pieces. But I think it can be so damaging because at the same time you think, well, that's all we want, and it's consuming us, the journey for it. So when people sort of make those sort of, thank your lucky stars you haven't got to do all this, you think I would give my left arm to do that right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess this is probably the start of the conversation around how we have these conversations, right? Like, obviously, there's always a time and a place, and you don't want to be at a dinner party or a kid's party and like I guess their small talk is inevitable, right? But when you have friends and stuff like that, it's about them being able to listen and you being able to share. I think that's something that's missing primarily in men, right? I think men, like you said earlier, we're problem solvers at heart. So if I tell you a problem, the first thing you're going to say is, have you tried X? Have you tried Y? Whereas what you actually want to do is just tell them that I'm feeling a bit shitty because I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask that? Is that something that was suggested to you a lot? As in, have you tried adoption?
What in terms of yeah, I mean, it was suggested, and I'll be completely honest with you. When we were going through the IVF challenges, and again, I think I didn't realise quite how much it had affected me and how much it was sort of changing me as a person and trying to be strong and, sort of everything will be all right and we'll get through this. And at the time, as I said, I was very, very lucky that I had my son and went on to adopt him just for his 18th birthday. It was suggested, but the desire for having the biological child as it was overwhelming. And I think when you're stuck in that journey of that fertility treatment, whatever it is you're going through, all you want is what you're working towards. You can't see any other solution. You can't see any other option. And it was only when we decided to actually, we need to stop this. One, and again, one of the things I think people sometimes forget is that it's not just the physical side of it; it's the financial side of it.
Yeah.
It's the emotion, and the financial side of it is it quickly mounts up, and we couldn't afford to do it anymore. We didn't have, I think, the emotional and physical. We just couldn't, and it was only after that we were given that time to grieve the ending of that journey that we sat back and thought, right, okay, so what should we do? What can we do? What do we want to do? And never look back. Don't get me wrong, that's a whole nother journey and a whole nother period of life, which was another part. You put the fertility side down, and you put that bag down, and you pick up the one going through the next part of it. And as I said earlier, the weight we carry, it's just as heavy. It's just full of different things, and that was a whole different journey. But again, the best thing we ever did. But at the time, it was full of different emotions and scared, worried. All of that. It's really difficult.
Yeah, I don't know, but I imagine the first time adoption is suggested is before you've said we don't want to do this anymore. Is that?
Yes. Yeah. So it's suggested at different points throughout the journey. Friends, family suggest it. People that outside of your sort of immediate circle who know suggest it. And again, I think that's where that sort of that problem solving sometimes can come in, and sometimes you don't want to hear it. You're just like, look, you just let us deal with this first. And you're always, or we were always hoping that that we'd go through the cycles and. We wouldn't have to think about that, because it's almost like admitting that actually this might not work, and you don't want to lose that hope. But again, it's such a difficult array of emotions going through that. And a number of people that I speak to, even now when I'm talking to sort of support groups and other people that are in it, sort of say we can't think about that at the moment. We need to just focus on what we're doing, and I completely agree, because it is so overwhelming. You just focus on what you're doing in the now rather than 2 or 3 years down the line potentially.
So, for listeners out there, male, female, who are either in this situation, or B, maybe have friends in this situation, or I guess something similar, right? Like there's other things around birth and that side of things. For example, you may get pregnant, but you may there's obviously miscarriages, and then there's obviously things like children born with disabilities or limbs missing. Obviously, these things are rarer, but that nuclear family, if you like, is you just go through the motions and you expect a healthy baby at the end of it. So I guess this would sort of work for everyone, right? It's not just, obviously yours is more specific, but yeah, what are the sort of things that you could suggest to either someone going through something similar or someone who has family members or friends in similar situations?
I think for the people going through it is just to know that you're not alone, and to please talk. There's so many fantastic resources out there and support groups for whatever it might be, because it's really hard to give that sort of specific, because you're right, there's so many different things that people might be going through. There's so many different aspects of fertility, of birth, of all of that. So one of the biggest regrets I've ever got about all of these things that I've been through is not reaching out for support at the time I needed it. Ultimately, I think we're all human, and whatever you're feeling at the moment is valid. Speaking for myself, going through the fertility journey, there were times I was jealous of people. There were times where I hated people. There were times where I was angry. I felt guilty. I felt worthless. I felt hope. It changes, and there's so many different emotions, but it's not to feel what I would say is don't add any more onto that. If you feel angry, you feel angry. You're within your rights. Whatever it is you're feeling is natural. It's part of this. There's no rule book for any of this that we're going through. And to know that it's okay, and that you're not going to be on your own feeling that way. But to just reach out and talk to someone, it's not going to fix the problem. Me telling someone at the time how upset I felt or how hopeless I felt, it wasn't going to magically make the situation go away. But sometimes it's that whole weight, and we'll come back to that sort of the weight on your shoulders. Sometimes we just need to put it down for a while, or let somebody else hold it for us for a bit and just hold that space. And then we can pick it up and we've got that bit more energy and hopefully be able to go on. And for people that know someone that might be going through anything like that, to put it bluntly, the platitudes, things will be all right, or it happened for a reason. Rather don't say anything than say that. The last thing sometimes we want to hear is someone say it'll be okay, or these things happen for a reason. Well, will it be okay? How do you know that? How can you with us going through this? And things will happen for a reason. That is one of the worst, but we hear it a lot. Yeah. It's just be there and say, how are you feeling? How are you? And just letting the person talk. And if they don't want to talk, that's fine. But you said it earlier on about that sort of small talk, and we try and sort of I think trying to make ourselves feel better with a bit of small talk is fine. Don't worry. It's just ask how you're doing, how you're feeling, how are you both, and just listen. And it might be that someone going through it will say, look, we're good and thank you for asking, but at least it's better than saying things will be all right, and just be there, listen, and realise that weight is getting heavier by the day. And I think that's probably the best bit of advice I can give, to be honest with you, because there's so many different situations we could all be going through related to that. There's no general piece other than just be there and just remember what that person might be going through.
Of course, there is everyone's, as we've said, everyone's situation is different. Everyone's sort of weight is different. One of the things that you've echoed a lot is the seeking support before, and again, it's something that I look to do. I look to implement now as sort of my career within this space is working with men before all this sort of comes in, so that we've got a bit more resilience, or we're able to have these awkward and tough conversations essentially for men. So I do agree with that a lot. And yeah, that brings us nicely onto the bag and the weight, and sort of spreading that around. So let's, big ambitions, right? 1 million people. So
big ambitions.
Talk me through this.
So my Share the Weight campaign, as I said, it's with my 24.7 kilo bag of worries. And just to remind it weighs 24.7 kilos, to remind people Samaritans are open 24/7. And big ambitions. I'm on a mission to ask 1 million people for help, 1 million people for help to share the weight on my shoulders. I think one of the reasons why I chose 1 million is because it is so big that some might say a tad impossible, we'll see, but some might say that. But for me, that's what makes it so special, is that there isn't a finite end. And I think I'm more battling biology than I am time. I think I'll probably end up giving up, or my knees or my back will give up before, anything else. I take this bag everywhere with me. And so far, I think I'm just over 700 people have helped share the weight on my shoulders. And I really actively started asking for help to share the weight at the end of July. Up until then, I'd had about 50, 60 people had helped. Just tried to hold it to see how heavy it was in bits and pieces. I've actively been asking for help since end of July. And as I said, we're just over 700 people now. It's probably been one of the most, it's been amazing. It's been one of the most incredible things that I've done for me, I think, in this time since I've been in the mental health space and the wellbeing space and suicide prevention, because it's enabled me to have some of the most heartwarming, heartbreaking, goosebump-inducing conversations with complete strangers. As I said, I take it to various different events, and I'll just turn up. So, like for example, this weekend I'm going to an organised run, like a 5 or 10k run. I'll take it with me, and I'll just turn up and talk to people, and then I'll ask people to help share the weight, whether it's on the run, whether it's before or after. I never go anywhere with any expectations. It might be that no one helps, but for me, that's part of the fun of it, is never quite knowing who I'm going to meet, who I'm going to talk to, who's going to help share the weight. What I've found with this is that it's been an incredible icebreaker for having some conversations, especially with men, that I would have never had before. I think I've said this to you before, social anxiety. I suffer really badly with social anxiety. I'm naturally, I think, more introverted. And I tend to sort of shrink into the background of events, parties, get-togethers, gatherings, that kind of thing. And so doing this has forced me to come out of that shell. But as I said, it's also enabled some incredible conversation with people I would never have met had I not have done this. And when I say that sort of 700 people, it's friends, family, complete strangers, celebrities, mayors, robots. It's been a completely incredible journey that sort of started off as a bit of an idea, and now there's events being planned just to share the weight. So I've got some running clubs that are organising specific share the weight events where I'll turn up and we get their running club to help share the weight. Got some walk and talks being arranged to help share the weight and get people out and talking. But as I said, I found the biggest impact has been conversations that I've had with men, and some of these conversations I will never forget. Ever, and they're ingrained in me. I go around, I take pictures, videos, if people are okay with that, and of people that have helped share the weight, document the journey, and just see where it takes me. And as I said, making the decision to ask 1 million people for help has been an absolutely incredible journey so far. And I'm so grateful to everybody that's helped, but everybody that opens up and actually talks. As I said, I've met men that have sort of, if it's okay, I sort of talk through 2 or 3 sort of different scenarios. Please. One man, I'll never forget the conversation we had. I was at an event and he happened to people give me a strange look when you're at an event with a big bag on your shoulders, big red, it's huge, you can't miss it. You get some strange looks, but for me, those are the conversation starters. It's when someone gives me that look, it's a case of, I bet you're wondering what this is. And there was one guy in particular at an event I went to, and we had the most incredible conversation, all because he gave me that look. He was a security guard. And through that conversation, it actually transpired that 2 days before, he nearly ended his own life. And we spoke for a long time about that. And at the time, he was holding the weight for me. He was sharing my weight, and he was talking to me about what had happened, what had led him to that point. And it was one of the most emotional conversations I've had. At the end of it, we had the man shake, that sort of slap of the hands and a big hug. And then we realised we didn't actually know each other's names. And we've been talking face to face for a good half an hour. And I told him all about me and my story, what it represented. He told me, that some really, really difficult things about how he was feeling. We didn't even know each other's names. And that's happened 2 or 3 times around that topic. And obviously I've had, 700 people. I've had some incredible moments of conversation. I've also seen just how much suicide has impacted people, because so many people I meet, it resonates with them because they've been impacted by suicide. They've either felt suicidal or they've been impacted by losing a loved one to suicide. And as I said, I could talk about this for hours and some of these conversations that I've had and the people that I've met, because one of the things I've also realised is I used to take a lot of inspiration from audiobooks or YouTube videos, the sort of male success stories, the Goggins of the world and all of this kind of stuff. Yeah. I don't anymore. It's the people that I'm meeting along this sort of road that have really fed that inspiration, because some of these people that I speak to, for me, the inspiration is these people that have turned up to do a 10K run who the morning before could barely get out of bed because they were crippled with anxiety or depression, that they would just, that they couldn't move. Or the people that have lost someone by suicide and who are now trying to turn their life into helping others. And, all of these amazing, and they're all just human beings. They're all just people that are around us. And that's the inspiration for me now is just the stories of us. It's incredible. As I said, I could talk about this for hours, so I'm going to stop and pause for a sec.
No, it's amazing.
I end up rambling.
It's amazing. It's the reason I started this podcast. It was like, you can hear from real men. Like, everyone wants to better themselves, but not everyone wants to be Goggins. You can look at Goggins and be like, yeah, cool, that's impressive, but it's not relatable. I actually can't think of anything that's relatable from David Goggins' story to my own life. Like, he's impressive, don't get me wrong, but yeah, that's why I started this podcast. Is people like you, people like me, some people known, some people not known, but it's still a bit more of a, I can grab hold of that story. I know where that ends or how that starts because I've lived a bit of it, which yeah, it's really really impactful. Why don't you just quickly tell everyone the other side of men and carrying 24.7 kilos, and let's call it the male bravado.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that's one of the great things about carrying a bag of worries on my shoulders is because there's always the maleness of life where we want to see how heavy something is and see that we could probably make it look lighter and bits and pieces. And I think through that the maleness of wanting to show how strong we are, it's actually really helped open up some incredible conversations. I'll have men coming out saying, "No, it's not that heavy," and they want to throw it up and down, and but it's through that action and through that sort of I want to show that that things aren't as heavy as we that they look, that have opened up those conversations. But I think that's indicative of men, is that we, or some of us anyway, is that we want to show that things don't affect us, that things aren't as heavy as they look. And, that ultimately can lead to our downfall, is that we think we are stronger or able to cope with things more than we can. And there's been times, and there's been a few times, as I said, I take this to a lot of runs, and there'll be times where some men have taken it. Their initial reaction is, "It's not that heavy, you ran the London Marathon with it, et cetera, et cetera," and then they'll run off with it, And I'm not a fast runner. I'm not the fittest person in the world. I just enjoy doing it, and I enjoy getting outside with it. And they'll run off with it, but you can see the moment that they realise that actually they've run a bit too fast at the beginning, and all of a sudden it's got a lot heavier than they thought it was. And that's the whole point of it, is that, we can carry it and carry it and carry it, but there will be a point where we're all of a sudden we'll realise that we've been carrying it for too long and it's too heavy, and we tried for too long to carry it on our own. And that's what I'm trying to get across with this, is that actually we don't need the bravado. You don't need to go running as fast as far as you can. We are stronger together. We go further together. If you want to go fast, I think there's that old proverb, isn't it? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So yeah, you might be able to do a 100-meter dash with it, but if we want to carry it across a marathon, it's better doing it together, and it's better sharing that load. But yeah, there's been some funny moments when I see that moment they realise that actually maybe I shouldn't have gone that quickly. But it's all part and parcel of it, and it's generated some fantastic conversations because of it.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, it's the perfect analogy, right? As soon as they disappear, and then they're like, "Oh crap! I did need a hand with that," which is great. Obviously, you have kids. You have a young son and a young daughter. Do you want to just briefly touch on that side of things? Obviously, getting younger people to start having these conversations, because that's where we need to go, right?
100%. And I think I'm glad you mentioned that, actually, because it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention. So don't get me wrong, my son's been fantastic, and he's helped share the weight a few times, and it's opened up some great conversations with between us. And he's been to a few events with me, and we do it together, and he's run with it. But I've also got to give a shout out to my daughter, who's got her very own 5-kilogram bag of worries, and she helps, and she'll come to some events, and she'll encourage younger people to share the weight and to show that it's okay to ask for help. And I think it is so important to have these conversations at a young age. I've been asked so many times in the past, when's the right age to have conversations with children about mental health? And I think sometimes we get caught up in the definition of mental health. For me, it's never too young an age to encourage children to ask for help and to not feel judged or to me, that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
It's when we look at the things that we carry on our shoulders, of life. We've all got it. Young people have got it. Adults have got it. I've had a broad spectrum of ages carrying my burden and Rhiannon's burden. We can talk about mental health all day long, but the whole thing is for me, this is all about asking for help and knowing that it's okay. So I don't think there is too young an age to show children that it's okay to ask for help. And as adults, we lead that by asking each other for help and talking about how we feel and talking about the burdens that we carry. And, don't get me wrong, age appropriately. But there's one thing talking to young people about mental health and, the various conditions and challenges, there's another thing saying, this is my worries. Can you help me carry it for a while and then give it back to me? And there's never, I don't think, too young an age to start setting that example for children, because the older they grow up, the more they'll be inclined to say, okay, it's okay to ask for help and it's okay to say we're struggling, because the weight we carry can be, it can be exhausting and it can be extremely heavy.
For sure, it's formative years, right? You learn you learn a lot in those years. So yeah, it's important to have a full spectrum on it and fully understand it. I would love to just sort of finally touch on what you personally think is doing really well in the men's space, or what you would like to see more of in the sort of men's mental well-being space.
I think for me, it goes without saying, there's some fantastic things being done to support men. And you can see that there's so many people trying to shift the narrative and try and support, as you said, the things that you're doing, I think is incredible. When you look at organisations, I'll mention them again, Samaritans, but places like Andy's Man's Club, I was at an event the other day and there were a couple of charities there. I think it was, I can't remember the name now, this is really bad, to do with mental health and motorbikes, encouraging men to, using motorbikes as a way of bringing men together. I think for me, and again, this is just my personal thoughts, as I said, I think we talk about mental health and well-being a lot, but for me, when you look at the weight that I carry, it's not mental health, it's not well-being, it's the fact that it's all of life's challenges that weigh us down, that we don't feel comfortable about talking to each other because of the judgment, because of the stigma. I think the more we can encourage and support conversations around just being honest about the stuff that's bothering us, that it's okay to talk about, yes, I'm an infertile man. Yes, at one point in my life, I was addicted to certain drugs. At the moment, I'm incredibly nervous doing this podcast with you. Tomorrow, I'm going to be incredibly anxious about this event that I'm going to. As a middle-aged man, I'm worried about money. I'm worried about my family. All of these things. I'm worried about work. All of these things. I think the more we can just have these kind of conversations, the more it encourages people to know that it's okay to feel the way we do, and then that has that knock-on effect. And as I said, I think there's a space where we need to do more of that and just being authentic in what we're going through. And I know it's not easy, and I know it's difficult, and I know there is judgment, there's stigma, there's all of this, but the more we have these kind of conversations, you facilitate all this amazing sort of conversations that you're doing, that's how I think we start to make that change. And one of the things I've really learned through this Share the Weight journey is the more we share our weight, the more we give permission for others to share theirs. And for me, that is the, where we want to get to a point of where we can just share with each other and know that it's okay.
Amazing. You're right, Andy. We could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. And I hope you and I do off camera, and we continue the conversation. And who knows, it may be a part 2. But for this podcast, I will let you have the final word and let people know where they can find you and potentially help share the weights.
Look, I really appreciate that. And as you said, I'm so grateful for all you're doing and for this opportunity. And yeah, if you want to find out more about the Share the Weight journey, you can look me up on Instagram, Share the Weight 24/7, and LinkedIn as well. I do a lot on there as Andy Baines-Vosper. And I will say, if anybody's listening to this, if anything has resonated, if anything has, resonated in any way, just know that you're not alone, and there's always Samaritans there as well on 116 123. But yeah, big thank you to me, from me to you, for this.